I'd like to open the floor for questions or comments. Make it brief, please, so that everyone can have an opportunity.
Assalamu alaikum. The core question lies in the fact that can you be truly Islamist and be a Democrat? Often when we talk about Sheikh Tanushi, there is a tendency to make him a post-Islamist. And in fact, when Azam Tamimi talks about Sheikh Tanushi, he calls him an Islamist, but a Democrat. And then also he mentioned about Maududi. Maulana Maududi and Jamaat Islami Hind failed to engage in the Indian democracy in a Nehruvian context up until 70s. So the question lies, can you be truly Islamist and be a Democrat? Or do you have to sort of do some compensation and go to the post-Islamist domain and then can engage with democracy?
So my argument is very simple conceptually. What is the idea of democracy? That there's a demos, a people, a sha'ab, hukm sha'ab, that rules. Now if you're going to say the people rules, you have to have some understanding of what you think the people is, what its properties are, what its attributes are, what its capacities are, what its capabilities are. And that's what different political theories differ in. Now, there are theories of democracy that assume very little about the people. Whatever people you have, through accident or historical conquest or violence, that's the people that you have. And you assume that they're going to differ in their passions, their desires, their beliefs, their interests, their aims, their aspirations. And then you ask the question, can a people that differs this way govern itself without one faction trying to dominate the other? There's another conception of democracy, and you see this in figures like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and in the earlier version of Sheikh Rashid, which says that, what if you assume that the people has other properties, that most of them are united in their beliefs, united in their aspirations, united around a conception of morality and virtue, that most of them are good and want to act in a certain way. And then you say, can that people be described from an Islamic standpoint as having the right to govern itself? And so in my opinion, the fundamental difference is not about the attitude of Islam towards democracy. The fundamental question is, what are the assumptions that you're making about all of these qualities and attributes of the people? And there's one interesting thing that I'd like to point out, which is, many people in the West like to associate Islamism with revolutionary violence or militant violence or something like that. But even figures like Maududi and Qutb and others, their theory is grounded on an assumption of very deep consent by the people. The people is already Muslim. Is Sha'ab Mutadayyin Bit-Taba'. The people has already consented to this because of their fitrah. This is what the people already wants. And so there's a sense in which much of this theory is based on these assumptions about what the people is. Now the question is, how do you explain why the people is not like that? Why were the Tunisian people so divided? Is it just because of colonialism? Is it just because of Bourguiba and Ben Ali? Is it just because of secular domination and ideology? Then you can say it doesn't matter what they think, eventually they'll all be Muslim again. Or do you say, well, wait a second, the world is complicated. And people use their minds and arrive at different conclusions, and we can't do anything about that peacefully. So that, in my opinion, is a very big question that is hard, I think, for a lot of Islamic thinkers to think about. Because then what you're fundamentally asking is, why aren't more Muslims Muslim? And is there any good reason for that, or are there only bad reasons for that that we don't really need to take that seriously. Sure.
Let me take 3 questions, just to save the time. Take 3 questions, and then the speakers answer this one.
Do you think there's an analogy to be drawn between thinking about... Do you think there's an analogy to be drawn between thinking about democracy as a basic foundational idea, if you like in the language of Islam, al-usul, versus thinking about democratic governance as a practical idea, more to do with the furu'? And so social contract inevitably leads to this notion that people are going to organize, as opposed to thinking about it in the way maybe early thinkers thought about it, if that makes sense.
The shift from Islamic democracy to Muslim democracy seems to be based on pragmatism. And I'm wondering if, so that's a concession that pragmatism plays a role in our thinking about these sorts of things. But has that gone far enough? Because modern nation state, the state itself, has a specific history, and many would say the state is constructed in the service of capitalism, and in the context of the US, in the Middle East, in the context of US hegemony.
Well, thank you very much. I've tried to, even it's a very short time, but I've tried to call the attention to how Islamic is the concept of Muslim democracy. And the idea is that it is Islamic. And as Ibn Ashur says in his book, Usul Nizam al-Ijtima'i fi Islam, the foundation of the social system in Islam, that, I mean, democracy is Islamic, but the democracy in Islam is better in a way than modern democracy. Ibn Ashur wrote his book during the 1940s, okay? And he's Imam al-A'zam of Jama' al-Zaytuna. And he's the one who wrote At-Tahrir wa Tanweer, which is one of the best tafsir of Quran. And I've tried to call your attention that we can go back with the concept of Al-Aqdu Bayn al-Umma wal-Hakim, which goes back to not only Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, but also to Al-Izz ibn Abd, not Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam. Yeah. So this idea of aqd, that there is an aqd between the Ummah and Al-Hakim. So Ibn Ashur or Sheikh Rashid, they say democracy is a system. It is right now, as he said in his letter, which I've read to you, up to now this is the best what the mankind have created in a way of dealing with public affairs and dealing with conflicts. However, what's better with Muslim democracy is that it goes beyond the borders of a national state, nation state. And here we go back to the concept of maslaha in Islam, in contrast with the concept of interest or maslaha within the concept of nation state. This will bring us to a lot of discussion. It's not about intimidation. It's about our right as a human being and as Muslims, first of all, to be free and to have a say in our public affairs and to decide who governs us. It's not about that democracy is a creation of the West. Why not? But this is a good tool which, if we are allowed to live in a democratic world, then we will be better Muslims. And actually, when we implement democracy as we believe in it, our democracy, we think that it is better because it is more universal. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Rahmatan lil Alameen. I think if we dig into this concept, we will find out that actually this is more Islamic than what is thought. What is a non-democracy is closer to Islam because this term it was not there. And it's not only about maqasid sharia, it's even about, if you read the Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya and Usul al-Fiqh, you will find these concepts. They are there. They've been there within our ummah. It's just that our generations, we've been cut from our inheritance. And we are reading Islam from the eyes and of modern time, that is nation state. So we need to bridge these gaps, and I think Sheikh Rashid Al-Ghannouchi is a big jump or big number of steps in this bridging with our inheritance.
Just had a question in terms of what exactly is the difference between Muslim democracy and, let's say, English democracy or American democracy? Because without a doubt, we can't ignore the contextual, contingent, circumstantial situations that has given rise to this kind of change in thinking or even development, which is fine. You know, it's within Sharia, you can say it's darura, this is the situation, this is the best you can do, it's pragmatic, it's realistic, etc. But in real terms, you know, isn't the English democracy or American democracy far more advanced in terms of, if it's just about everyone has a different conception of the good, the communists in Tunisia, the modernists, the secularists, the Islamists, all have different conceptions of the good. They may be united as an identity, Muslim identity, but their conception of the good is very different. So if it's just about how do we best resolve this competing idea of the good, and the best way is democracy, that's fine. The West is far more advanced in that, resolving conflict, allowing freedom of thought, pluralism, etc. So where's the difference? I'm just failing to see what the difference is between Muslim democracy, English democracy, or even French democracy.
Last one.
Assalamu alaikum. Just following on from the previous couple of questions, I was trying to understand in my mind or how your understanding of Muslim democracy, Islamic democracy, deals with some of the limitations of democracy that we see in the implementations around the world, where if a society itself is radicalized over a number of years, generations, then they will always vote for extremist and radicalized governments, or governments that want to push domestic and foreign policies along a particular track. So how does your understanding of Islamic democracy deal with those kinds of situations?
I don't know the gentleman's name here, but I want to agree with a lot of what you said and observed, because there is a very big difference between Islamic democracy and Western democracy. The original vision in an Islamic state. You're very right that what Muslim democracy is not a distinct system. It's a distinct attitude and rationalization for a system that looks much more like most parliamentary democracies. So in Public Freedoms in the Islamic State, Sheikh Rashid says, we're not just arguing for standard Western parliamentary democracy. And he has many fascinating critiques of it. But what comes out of the 2014 Constitution is very similar. The president is supposed to be Muslim, but who in Tunisia is not legally a Muslim? The state has an Arab Islamic identity, but that's not given any content in the Constitution. It's up to the people. So you're right. So what I would say is, what Muslim democracy is a Muslim or Islamic attitude towards this fact, also with the caveat that it understands politics not just as a one-time agreement about moderation and toleration and democracy, in which you then pursue your aims in the private sphere, but allows for ongoing competition and struggle in the public sphere. So if you had at some point 60-70% of the people voting for a religious party, it would not be constrained to not pursue aims or legislation in line with what that morality wants. So your observation is very perceptive, and I agree with it. But the only thing I want to say is there is something contingent about it. But is there? Is this the exception? Is it the exception that a given society has all of these various parties, or is that actually the norm? Is that actually how you ought to begin by seeing politics? As opposed to, well, in reality, everybody's supposed to be pious, but you have these contingent things because of Bourguiba and colonialism. Well, what if the other assumption were made? That this is the norm. Politics is about that kind of disagreement. Would Islamic political thinking have to begin from a different place?